Welcome to Life Stories, where a quiet phone call can shatter a lifetime of sacrifice. Imagine devoting your entire life to others, raising a child, loving a husband, showing up for everyone but yourself, only to realize one day, in the silence of an unanswered call, that no one is coming for you. This is not a story about growing old. It's a story about waking up, about the courage it takes to walk away, not in anger, but in aching clarity. And what happens when, after decades of forgetting who you are, you finally choose to remember? She didn't slam the door. She didn't leave a note. She simply vanished. Stay with us, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about love, memory, and what it really means to come home. Now let's begin. The rain had been falling for hours, fine and silver, like ash. It slicked the cracked driveway, darkened the hydrangeas sagging along the front porch, and whispered down the window panes of the old Bennett house, a house that no longer remembered the sound of laughter. Inside, Margot Bennett sat at her kitchen table, wrapped in the same oatmeal-colored cardigan she had worn every morning since Frank's funeral. The cardigan still smelled faintly of his cologne, of cedar and aftershave, and the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco. She cupped her coffee in both hands, her knuckles like polished stones. The cup's heat barely touched the cold sinking into her fingers. 67 wasn't old, not by the standards of the world outside. But inside this house, surrounded by the echo of a life carefully lived and quietly abandoned, she felt ancient. She had spent over 3 decades as the town's school librarian, her voice a familiar hush among the shelves. She had raised a daughter, tended a husband, baked birthday cakes, remembered everyone's favorite pie. And yet now there was no one left to ask what she wanted on her birthday. Now the pie crusts went unfilled. The rain blurred the world beyond the window. Somewhere out there, her daughter Lauren was drinking her 3rd cup of overpriced coffee, fielding calls on her Bluetooth, juggling deadlines and PTA meetings, and the needs of a family Margot had only ever seen in Christmas cards. When Margot called her the night before to ask, simply, if she could come help her pack, Lauren had paused just long enough to let the silence speak for her. Then she'd said, with forced warmth, "Now's really not a good time, Mom." That had been the moment. The click of the call ending had echoed louder than thunder. Margot hadn't told her that the house had been sold. She hadn't mentioned the little cottage she'd found on the Carolina coast, a salt-worn 1-bedroom wrapped in wild jasmine and fog. She hadn't said a word about the boxes already packed in the basement or the goodbye letters stacked in the drawer of the hallway desk, one addressed to Lauren, sealed and unsigned. She didn't tell her because something inside her had gone suddenly, irrevocably still. Margot rose from the table and moved through the kitchen with the deliberate grace of someone who no longer rushed for anyone. She paused at the doorway to the living room, her gaze tracing the outline where the couch used to be, where Frank had once fallen asleep with a book on his chest and the dog curled at his feet. The dog had died 2 winters ago. Frank had followed not long after. And Lauren? Well, Lauren had been drifting for years. Her phone calls had grown shorter, her visits rare and obligatory. She'd stop by once every few months, bringing store-bought cookies and distracted glances at her watch. It wasn't cruelty. That would have been easier. It was absence by 1,000 kindnesses, soft words, polite refusals, a calendar always just too full. And now the house was empty of more than furniture. Margot walked to the fireplace and reached behind a stack of old photo albums. Her fingers found the edge of a small tin box, cool to the touch. Inside it was a folded piece of paper, a number scribbled in fading ink, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She stared at it. Not Lauren's. Another name, another chapter, a secret even Frank had never known. She closed the box and slid it into her coat pocket. By the time the movers arrived, the house would be bare. But not this morning. This morning she still had the weight of memory to carry out. As she opened the hall closet, a photograph fluttered to the floor. It had slipped from behind a box of winter scarves. Margot bent down slowly, her knees cracking, and picked it up. a grainy image of her and a young woman on the beach, 25 years ago. But it wasn't Lauren. The girl in the photo had freckles, wild red curls, and a smile that dared the world to come closer. A name whispered through her like a ghost. Clara. She hadn't thought of Clara in over 2 decades. But now the memory came crashing back, of long summer nights, of laughter that didn't need translation, of a choice made under the pressure of what should be rather than what was. She had buried it. Buried her. And yet, in that moment, holding that photo, Margot felt something electric tremble through her. A new kind of ache. Not grief, but recognition. She had not just lost her husband. She had not just been forgotten by her daughter. She had abandoned herself. The storm outside cracked with thunder. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, reflecting in the glass of the picture frame. For a heartbeat, it lit the room in stark silver. Margot didn't flinch. She tucked the photo into her purse. The cottage on the coast waited, and maybe, just maybe, so did something else. Someone else. Have you ever made a choice that rewrote who you thought you were? What would you do if the person you left behind was the only one who ever truly saw you? Margot thought the hardest goodbye would be to her daughter. She was wrong. Next, the name she never dared speak is about to speak back. The cottage smelled of salt and old books. A strange combination, but one Margot found oddly comforting. The worn wood floors creaked beneath her steps as she moved slowly through the small living room, brushing her fingers along the faded spines of secondhand novels she had picked up from the library's donation shelf. Outside, the sea murmured low and constant, a hush that folded around the house like an old lullaby. She'd been there a month now. Long enough to learn the rhythm of the tides, to nod hello to the neighbors on their morning walks, to discover the little bakery that made scones too crumbly and coffee too bitter, but served both with a smile that felt genuine. But she had yet to unpack the tin box. It sat unopened on the nightstand, next to her reading glasses and a half-finished crossword. Every night she told herself she'd open it tomorrow. Every morning she found a reason not to. There was always something else. A drawer to organize, a wall to paint, a garden to water, anything to avoid touching the rusted edges of a name she had buried beneath decades of duty and silence. Until this morning. The sun rose pink and quiet over the sea, casting long shadows across the porch where Margot sat with her coffee. The air held the first trace of autumn, crisp enough to raise the tiny hairs on her arms. She reached for the box before she could think too hard and brought it out into the light. Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped the lid open. There it was. The number. Clara's number. Or at least the one that had been scribbled hastily on the back of a library checkout slip 27 years ago. The ink had faded, but not enough to forget. Beneath the number, a note in Clara's hand. If you ever change your mind. Margot swallowed. The coffee turned bitter on her tongue. She folded the paper once, twice, then tucked it back inside. Her breath came shallow, uneven. She stood and paced the porch, one hand over her mouth. She had changed her mind. Too late, maybe. Or maybe just late enough to matter. The day passed in a blur of distraction. Margot rearranged furniture that didn't need rearranging, scrubbed counters that were already clean. But Clara stayed in the air, in the corners of her mind, speaking in a voice Margot hadn't let herself remember in years. You don't have to be who they told you to be. Back then, Margot had been a wife, a mother, a keeper of routines and recipes. She had told herself that love like that, was something to be sacrificed for the greater good. She convinced herself that loyalty to her family meant silence, meant letting go. Clara had loved her loudly, recklessly, fully, and Margot had walked away. Not because she didn't love her back, but because she didn't know how to live with the truth of that love. Now, sitting in a house that no one knew was hers, in a town where her past couldn't find her, Margot began to wonder if she had walked away from the only version of herself that had ever been truly alive. That night, she pulled out her phone. She typed the number slowly, paused, then deleted it, then typed it again. She stared at it for a long time, the blue light of the screen casting sharp shadows across her face. Then she hit call, The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice. This number is no longer in service. She let the phone fall into her lap. Her chest tightened, but not in the way she'd expected. It wasn't loss, not exactly. It was regret, sharp and clear like glass beneath bare feet. She sat there for hours, listening to the ocean, listening to herself. Then just past midnight, her phone buzzed, an unknown number. Her hands moved on their own. She answered. Hello? A pause. Then a voice, older, rougher, but unmistakable. Margot? Her heart stopped. Time seemed to still. Clara? Another pause. This one longer, softer. I heard you were back on the coast, Clara said, voice catching. Took you long enough. Margot couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. And then Clara asked quietly, why now? Margot looked around the room, at the boxes half unpacked, the shelves only half full, the life that was only just beginning. She answered honestly, because this time, I don't want to disappear. Have you ever waited too long to say something that mattered? What would you do if the past answered your silence with grace instead of anger? Margot thought she was moving away from a life she no longer wanted, but what if she's stepping back into one she never truly left? In the next chapter, a letter from the past, and the question no one wants to ask, what if it's not too late? Clara's voice echoed in Margot's chest long after the call ended. There hadn't been much said, not really. Just a handful of words exchanged like fragile heirlooms, passed carefully between hands that had once known each other by heart. But the sound of her name on Clara's lips again, it was like hearing a song from another life. One she used to hum under her breath while folding laundry, hiding it in the quiet corners of days that demanded someone else's version of her. For days after that call, Margot moved through her new home as if floating, half present, half spun in the gravity of what might come next. She baked bread she didn't eat, rearranged the spice shelf twice, stared at the tide chart on the fridge like it might give her a sign. When she passed the mirror in the hallway, she barely recognized the woman inside. There was something softer in her eyes now, but also something that shimmered with quiet fear. Then, one Thursday morning, Clara showed up. It wasn't announced. No text, no call. Just the sound of gravel crunching under tires and a knock that made Margot's heart leap into her throat. She opened the door slowly, afraid her imagination had conjured it all. But there she was. Clara stood on the porch in a navy peacoat, rain-speckled and smiling the kind of smile that came with 1,000 unsaid things. Her hair had gone silver, wild as ever, and her eyes, God, those eyes, had not changed at all. They still carried the same daring, the same unbearable tenderness. I brought pie, she said simply, holding up a brown paper bag. Fig and bourbon. You always like the strange ones. Margot's voice caught in her throat. I still do. They sat at the kitchen table like no time had passed at all. Except, of course, it had. Decades of it. Miles of it. But time, Margot realized, did strange things to love. It didn't erase it. It weathered it, softened it, made it quieter, but also more enduring. I thought I'd never hear from you again, Clara said, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. After you left, I tried to hate you. I really did. But it didn't stick. Margot looked down at the table. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't know how to love you and be who everyone else needed me to be. Clara nodded slowly, the years flickering across her expression like shadows on water. I know, she said. But you're here now. That night, they sat on the back porch wrapped in wool blankets, sipping wine as the stars freckled the sky. Clara talked about her life, about the house she'd renovated upstate, the bookstore she ran with too little help and too much love, about the woman she'd loved after Margot, and how that love had never quite unseated the first. Margot listened. And then she told her truth. She told Clara about the house on Willow Creek Lane, the silence that had grown like ivy over the walls, the way her daughter had slipped quietly out of reach without ever slamming the door. She confessed the guilt she carried for choosing herself so late and the shame of wanting more even after a good life. And Clara, bless her, didn't flinch, didn't judge. You're not late, she said. You just arrived exactly when you were finally ready. For weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Clara came and went, staying through long weekends, returning to her life up north with promises to come back soon. They talked, they cooked, they argued gently about how to hang the wind chimes. There were mornings of laughter and evenings of silence, comfortable, sacred. Then one day, Margot found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. It was from Lauren. Just a single page, written in handwriting that looked rushed and unsure. Mom, I drove by the old house last week and saw the for sale sign. The neighbors said you moved, but no one knew where. I guess I just didn't expect you to go without telling me. I've been thinking about you more than I should admit. I don't know why I didn't show up when you asked. I told myself I was busy, but the truth is, I didn't know what to say to you anymore. We've both changed, and I don't think I ever gave you room to do that. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Love. Margot read it 3 times. Then, slowly, she folded it and placed it in the same tin box where Clara's number had once lived. She didn't rush to call. She didn't rush to forgive. Some bridges could still be rebuilt, but only if both sides reached out. That night, she walked the beach alone. The waves curled toward the shore like the slow inhale of something ancient and patient. She thought about how long she had lived half asleep, how long she had waited for someone to notice her fading. And now, here she was. She wasn't young, she wasn't healed, but she was awake and loved and seen, and perhaps most importantly, willing. Clara met her at the porch steps, barefoot, wine glasses in hand. Margot smiled, took the glass, and whispered, "You came back." Clara raised a brow. "So did you." And there, in the breath between the tide going out and coming in, Margot Bennett finally understood. Some goodbyes are really beginnings dressed in mourning. Some disappearances are maps waiting to be read. And sometimes, choosing yourself doesn't mean being alone. It means finally being found. What part of Margot's journey stayed with you the most? If this story touched you, comment 100 below. Where in the world are you listening from? Share this story with someone who might need it today. Thank you for watching Life Stories.